How's everyone doing this morning? Are we having a good con so far? Gonna make it a great day. Well, thank you for coming. I am Mike Inslee. I am the chairman of Pensacon, and I want to welcome you to our first panel of the day. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest. You know him as Davros, the longest standing actor to play that role in Doctor Who, Mr. Terry Malloy. And of course, Doctor Number 5 himself, Mr. Peter Davison. Woo! So, Peter, I have to start this morning with a question that was sent to me by a fellow, I think his name was Colin Baker.
Oh, boy.
And he said that the first thing I should ask you on the panel this morning is, why was your doctor so wimpy?
Well, I've always prided myself on being understated, as opposed to Colin Baker, who's always overblown. So I was just trying to set it all up for Colin, really. It was just a shame about the costume. He'd already tried to kill me. He killed me once. He tried to kill me once earlier on in the series, and finally he got my job. But nevertheless, my favourite story was Caves of Androzani, apart from the fact I turned into Colin Baker at the end, which of course is a fate worse than death.
And Terry, you came into Doctor Who as Davros. Mm-hmm. The role had already been originated, but then you sort of grabbed it for all it was worth and with gusto and took over that role. What was it like coming in after the character was already established, and how did you approach that?
Well, it was interesting because I didn't know who Davros was. I know I don't look old enough, but in fact I was 16 when Doctor Who started. So, I mean, my doctors, if they're your doctors, was Hartnell and Troughton, and then I went off and did other things. So when Matthew Robinson, I came about purely by accident. Michael Wisher was meant to be playing it, but there was a BBC technical strike, and everything was shunted a month forward or backward or whatever. So our director, Matthew Robinson, was brought in to direct Resurrection, and I just finished working with him on a TV series down at TVS, Television South. And I was playing an idiot of a DJ, and I did lots of silly voices and what have you. And he just rang me up. He said, "Do you know anything about the Daleks?" I said, "Yeah, of course I do. I watched them with Pat Troughton." He said, "What about Davros?" I said, "I haven't a clue. Who's he?" So he said, "Well, come and have a look at this." And I went down to see him, and he sat me down in front of Genesis and said, "That's Davros, do you want to do it?" And like any actor worth his salt, I say, no, I know lots of people who could, but not me, please, No, I jumped at it because the thing that I found interesting was it was almost like a radio performance because of the mask. You were behind this mask, which didn't move very well. And so, I kind of fell into it, really, thinking it was a one-off job. But then JNT kept on dragging me back to face Colin. And Sylv, who I'd worked with before in theatre, way before Doctor Who.
And another thing that you guys have in common is both of you, in the dark times, and now still, we call them the dark times when Doctor Who was not on television. You guys were working with Big Finish, and you did audios, and so how is that experience different from working on the television series in terms of how you approach the character? Are there things that you do differently when you're doing an audio as opposed to a filmed piece?
Well, the great thing about audio is you don't have to learn the words.
Yay.
And you don't have to be in costume, so you don't have to run around corridors for great lengths of time. They do all put all that, they don't even let you move away from the microphone. Sometimes in radio, when you're sort of leaving a scene or leaving a room, you back off as you're going, but they don't even do that, so you never even have to move your feet. Yeah. You just stand in this booth all day, but it's done very, very cleverly. And of course it was responsible for keeping the programme alive. I think the Big Finish audios when the series went off the air, so it's great credit to them. And I love doing them. I never approached it, I don't know about you, but I never approached it any differently. Maybe I should have done, I don't know. But I just loved to come back and do it. And obviously I was older, therefore the performance, I guess, was slightly different. But I thought there's no point in trying to act as if I was still 31 or whatever I was. So I just did it as if, I was playing the part as I always had done. And it seems to work.
Yeah, I mean, radio's been a major part of my life, really. So yeah, I've grown up with it, and it's a medium I like best, because actually the actor you can do the stuff that we could never do on film or on stage, because physically we're wrong. But on radio, I can still be 180 pounds of whipcord muscle and steely-eyed killer, which is great. And as you say, you don't have to put all the mask and the little chariot on either. So it's playing the truth of the character. It's not, but you have to do it. You have to contain it. It's a bit like radio is a bit like doing film, where your face is 75 feet wide. There's certain subtleties that sometimes theatre actors get caught up in, but television actor into television into radio is a fairly good crossover. And as I say, it's a very relaxed way of working, I always found. I mean, I work a lot at Pebble Mill in Birmingham, and you could always tell the radio actors, because they were all around a table laughing and joking and everything, and all the actors who were on a major drama or something were circling each other like sharks, and we we actually didn't want to go into work, we were all saying, oh God, we're going to go into record now, it's breaking into our social life here. It's a very relaxed way of working, and as an actor, you take it. But the great thing is you can paint the pictures. It's painting pictures. It's basically painting all the pictures in your head, because the pictures are always better on radio. What happens in here is better than anything they could put up on the screen. So, yeah.
And I know these people are going to ask you a lot of questions about the series, but one of my favorite things from the 50th was the Five-ish Doctors.
Yay.
Yes.
And and since you wrote it and directed and starred, could you tell us how that idea came about and how it worked with the BBC as far as because a lot of people were very concerned that the BBC wasn't going to have anyone from the classic series involved in the 50th anniversary.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was asked this question about whether the Classic Doctors will be in the 50th anniversary special for a good 2.5 years before the actual 50th year. And I always was fairly clear in my mind that we weren't going to be in it. I didn't think it somehow fit. I know we had the 5 doctors when I was there, and then I think the 2 doctors after I left. But, but we were all a bit younger then. We changed quite a lot by 2013. So it seemed to me unlikely that they could find a way to fit us in. And I was asked at a convention, I think it was Louisville, Kentucky, although it may have been Hurricane Who. And I was asked, this is about the 3rd or 4th time I'd been asked, are the Classic Doctors going to be in the 50th anniversary special? And I replied slightly frivolously, I didn't think we were, but if we weren't, I was damn well going to make my own. And it was just a casual remark. And then the very next convention I went to, I got a question from the audience which said, apparently you're making your own 50th anniversary special. And so, oh dear, I suppose I ought to do something then. And I'd done a couple of short videos for a convention, Gallifrey 1, where I had not been able to turn up, and I'd sent a little skit as an apology, and then I'd done another one the following year. So normally I'd done it with my little camera, and that's how I planned to do the 50th, the Five-ish Doctors reboot. You'll have to shut me up, actually, at some point about this, because I can drone on for absolutely hours about this.
Keep talking.
And I'm very aware that I didn't get Terry in it, and I'm very sorry. But so...
I've got an idea for the next one.
Okay, good. Yes. Yeah. So I started off on that basis, and I asked Colin and Sylvester if they would be involved, and Paul, and they said yes. I don't think they were at all convinced. They didn't know what I was talking about. And it started off, the idea was about 5 minutes long, and it kind of grew. I had asked Stephen Moffat if he would make a brief appearance, and he'd said foolishly yes. And because I wanted to film him down at Cardiff, I had to send them the script. So I wrote a very basic script and sent it off to Stephen, who couldn't be bothered to read it. So he left it on the desk of Faith Penhill, who ran BBC. Cardiff, and she picked it up and read it and thought, this would make a really good little extra for the 50th anniversary special. So they called me down there one day and said, we'd like to give you a camera crew. And I think it was £25,000. Now, for some reason, although I do know realistically how much television cost, I thought £25,000 seemed like quite a lot of money.
Yeah. It's about half a day. Isn't it?
We then sat down to lunch, and by the end of the lunch, the 25,000 quid had gone.
Yeah.
It would just because I'm basic, getting a one set or another set or just organising things. The money just goes. But I was very excited by the idea that we had a camera crew, and actually that then I was directing it. So we started off, and I kept, just every day I would write another scene. And as an example, my daughter rang me up one day and said, John Barrowman's very cross about not being in the 50th anniversary special. And I said, right, we'll have him in ours then. So I wrote a little scene for John Barrowman. And then the huge turning point, I suppose, was Sylvester said to me, I really want to help you out with this, but I'm afraid I have to go back to New Zealand to finish The Hobbit. And
He's still doing that, isn't he?
Two things came out of that. Was that Sylvester kept walking around telling everyone he was in The Hobbit. So I thought I'll put that in the 50th, in my Five-ish Doctors reboot. And also I said to him, well, I tell you what, I'll write a scene for Peter Jackson, who's obviously the director of The Hobbit. And so he said, yeah, all right, well, I'll pass it on to him. I didn't hear anything. So then I got his email from Stephen Moffat, and I wrote Peter Jackson an email saying, please, would you do this thing? I never expected to get a reply at all. No. 2 minutes later, I got a reply saying, yes, of course I'll do it, and I'll get Ian McKellen in it as well. So suddenly, the whole thing took off, and it ended up being... The BBC, having started this roller coaster, then wanted me to cut it. They wanted me to... I filmed about 35 minutes. 35 minutes we'd filmed. And Brian Minchin, who was sort of the overall, I guess, in charge of it, took me aside and said, we think it would be better if it was 10 minutes long. And we argued about this for a couple of days, and then in the end I just said to him, if you make me cut it, I'll tell the fans. And to empower you, you've no idea of the fear that struck in him. So we actually didn't cut it. We trimmed it, and I think it was 33 minutes in the end. But everything that we wanted in was in. So.
Yeah, it's great.
And I must thank my daughter, who kind of was brought in to produce it effectively and arrange everyone's arrival and get through to their agents and stuff. And she was invaluable. That's it. I'll stop there, but I could go on, but I'll stop there.
You see, you have the power.
So, Terry, you created the Daleks as Davros. So I'd like to know from both of you, what do you think the draw of the Daleks is? Why have they've endured more than any other Doctor Who monster, and in fact, Dalek mania was so strong that they almost eclipsed the show in the beginning. They sort of saved the show as it was kind of during the William Hartnell years when it was sort of struggling. So what do you think is the draw of the Daleks, and why do you think even that design still works? Although sometimes you see things that are kind of science fiction from the 60s and you think, oh boy, that looks really dated. The Daleks don't look dated. Yeah. They still work. So why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, you look at it on, coldly in the light of day and think it's this large, strange pepper pot with bumps on it, and a sort of Magimix whisk at the front, and a sink plunger, a loo plunger. Who's going to be scared of that? But it's I don't know. It's got to be something to do with the actual inhumanity of what's inside it that is, I suppose, was the hook and made people very scared. I'm delighted to say that that the furniture manufacturers have made a fortune out of Doctor Who because you've all been spending your lives hiding behind it whenever the Daleks come on. But I can't explain it. There's I suppose less is more in a sense, because you don't actually, a bit more now, but in those days you really didn't know what was inside, and people said that was the Dalek, which it isn't. It's a travel machine, for what's inside, but it's that sort of what is in there, it's a bit like the,
Yeah, no, they do have a power, and I suppose if it's one of those questions, a bit like why is Doctor Who itself successful? If we knew the secret, we would be making many other programs exactly the same. It's something about the Daleks. I remember going to an exhibition when I was about 13 or 14 at the local dance hall, actually. They had a sort of mini touring Doctor Who. I remember seeing a Dalek up close for the first time. I imagine they were about 3 foot tall. And, they're up here.
Big things,
big things, and terrifying. It's true. And I don't know why. It's just an essential
I have to I remember when we were doing the first Resurrection, and we were coming up to the producer's run.
Yeah.
Now, we have the Dalek operators, and they trundle around these things going, exterminate, exterminate. But on the producer's run, JNT wanted the Dalek incomplete, so they had to trundle around, with the tops on. And we'd gone up for lunch, and we were going to do the run in the afternoon, and I came down early, because I thought, I'm just going to run over a few lines. And I walked into this totally empty, massive rehearsal room, and there were these 3 Daleks sort of slumped in the corner. And I walked over to get my script, and as I walked past them, all the eye stalks followed me. And there was one of those moments of, oh no, these are my boys.
I mean, they do move. One thing, actually, which is very different from other creatures in Doctor Who, is they move incredibly quickly. I remember when we did Resurrection of the Daleks, as usual, I was chased around corridors, but I was amazed at the speed they use. Every other creature, really, Cybermen included, they don't move fast.
They lumber around, yeah.
And you could sort of walk away and escape. The Daleks move like grease lightning.
So, one other question I had here, because I was personally scarred as a child by you, Peter. Because in America, I started watching Doctor Who in the late 70s when it first came to America on PBS, and I was 8 or 9 years old when it first started airing, and by the time we got to your era, I was probably 10 or 11. I had been watching Tom Baker. They ran Tom Baker's entire run, and then at the end of that, they went right back to Tom Baker and ran him again because we didn't have the episodes yet available to the U.S. So I never saw him regenerate into you.
Okay.
So I just wondered why. Well, I thought maybe the series is over. We've moved on into something else. So by the time we did the second run, that's when the regeneration happened. And in America at that time, it was a very different time, a different place. We didn't have the internet. I know that's strange to people now, but we did not have the internet. And so I had no idea that there were other doctors. I mean, I had just grown up with this program that I loved and adored, and I didn't know that there were other people who had played the Doctor. I knew about regeneration because obviously the Master had regenerated in the series, but I didn't know that Tom was going to climb to the top of a tower and fall off, and suddenly this new guy would be there. So it's kind of a two-pronged question. Do you think that the internet has, do you think something's been lost in that we know, like we knew that Matt Smith was going to replace David a year before he came on board. We knew that Peter Capaldi was going to come in a year before Matt left. Do you think that's taken away anything from the series? And also, how do we, as fans, there's this time after a new Doctor comes on board where everybody's like, oh, I hate this guy. I don't like this guy. He took away my Doctor. I don't like him. And then all of a sudden, and then by, half the season in, we're like, oh, he's so great. We love him so much. Do you think that's a constant in Doctor Who?
I think it is a constant, yes. I mean, in the case of my son, when it was announced that Matt Smith was leaving, sobbed for a week and then announced that he was never going to watch the series. Well, of course, when it came on, he said, oh, I'm going to just watch the first one, then that's it. And then by the end of it, he loved it again. So we're so fickle, really, aren't we? Mm-hmm. But I was aware that there would be a problem in the States because, for the most part, you'd either only seen Tom Baker or John Pertwee very briefly and then Tom Baker. So I was aware there would be a problem, but in terms of my taking over in Britain, I was more intimidated by the first 4 Doctors together rather than Tom, who I hadn't really watched that much, not because I didn't like him, only because I was then off at college and things like that. My Doctor was Patrick Troughton, and I suppose living up to that, I found probably the most intimidating thing about it. But in Britain, everyone is aware. I don't think the internet's affected it really, because everyone's aware in Britain certainly. When I was announced as the Doctor, it was on the 9 o'clock news. So everyone knew, and I think that's been the case in most regenerations. It doesn't seem to lessen the excitement, I don't think. I mean, I think everyone was just as excited when they found out David Tennant was the next Doctor and when Matt Smith was.
Yes, I suppose the internet sort of has enhanced the sort of the Twitterati who are speculating on things and running possible spoilers past everyone. And somebody always wants to be the first to be able to announce it, you know. Or I've heard from, you know, somebody who picks up the dry cleaning for Peter Davison, you know, that Georgia Moffat's going to be the next Doctor, you know.
But on the other hand, the internet got us Doctor Who in the U.S. broadcast on the same day that it's broadcast in the U.K. now, which is a wonderful thing. For when it first came back in 2005, we didn't have that. Do you, like when I'll go back to my childhood, no one knew what Doctor Who was. There was a very small group of us in the United States. How do you feel about the expansion of Doctor Who into the U.S.? Because many times I've talked to people and they say that fans over here are often more excited than the fans in Britain. So, what do you think about that, and how did that change, you think?
Well, there were always hot spots. I mean, I remember the very first very first convention I did was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at the Hotel Camelot. So, obviously, it was usually down to the program manager of the local PBS station. If they liked Doctor Who, they bought Doctor Who. So there was several places in Florida that were big Doctor Who places. Chicago was a very big Doctor Who area. Denver was, and I think parts of California were. Other places just never had it at all because you know, the program manager didn't like science fiction, and that was it. It's very nice that it's now a huge franchise. On a personal level, I worry sometimes when you know, sweet little children come up to my table and their parents say, "Look, that's the Fifth Doctor," and they go, "Where? I can't see him. Isn't he young and fond highlights and has a stick of celery on his lapel?" But apart from that, it's very nice that there are fans. It has been a huge change over the last few years. From the dear old faithful used to, old, I don't mean old really, the faithful fans who used to come to the conventions, and now we have, you know, the children dressed up as Doctor Who or TARDISes or various characters from the series. So I welcome it. I love it.
I think there has been a crossover since the new series started, that people have been pulled into it. And I mean, I meet a lot of children who watched a bit, and then now they've gone back because their parents said, "Oh, well, if you like that, you must watch this." And they're total, fans, and they probably know a lot more about it than we do, Yeah. So please don't ask us questions about the series.
Okay. With that, we'll open the floor to questions. We have 2 microphones on each side of the room. If you want to come up and ask questions, you can go to those. I do want to say that Doctor Who is going back to its roots. Our local PBS station, WSRE, is going to start on April 2nd showing classic Tom Baker episodes on Saturday nights. And we'll start over here, ma'am. What's your question?
Hey, first of all, I met y'all 2 yesterday, and you 2 are 2 of the nicest people that I've met, celebrities that I've met here, so, thanks.
We must have been on an off day. Thank you.
But this question is actually I have 2 questions. Okay, for Mr. Davis, and this is just a quick yes or no question. Do you know the name of the Doctor?
Yes, but I'm not telling you.
That's what I figured. and for you, my question is, do you like the way that reroute. Who is your favorite Doctor?
Dr. Mortlock. She's really good. She's my GP. She sorted out my diabetes and all sorts of things. She's really cracking, yeah. Well, Peter, obviously, yeah.
He's sitting right next to you.
Last year it would have been Colin Baker, but
yeah,
it's
never been Sylvester.
Thank you.
And we're going to go over here and get your question, sir.
Thank you. My question kind of goes back to the Big Finish that you all have talked about before. Big Finish really has definitely carried the baton for Doctor Who for so many years. And it's really a unique concept, at least for the US, because in Britain with the BBC, with the radio plays, that's very common and it's very well known. Here in the US, that's not really done a whole lot. And I know for me, for somebody who's only gotten into Big Finish probably for the last 6 years now, the depth and the wealth of stories that are available that basically feature every cast member from the original series playing the same roles with new stories, with new characters. And I know Colin has said repeatedly that Big Finish has rehabilitated his Doctor in the eyes of the fans and really given it a new lease on life. Could you speak kind of some to that of the characters as far as, like, I know Peter, you've done some great comedy themed Big Finish stories that really, you never got to play anything like that on TV. And Terry, I know Quadriga Stoin and with the Companion Chronicles, you've got to play characters that, you know, didn't exist back then. So if you could kind of speak to that and how you've enjoyed that, because I know it's been a great fun. I talked to Lisa Bowen for hours last year when she was here about it. If you just could kind of speak to that as far as that unique enterprise of continuing the classic series well now into the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said before, I think Big Finish has contributed enormously. It's not, when it first started, it really, there was no one to control it. And I don't mean by that it was out of control. It was just that you could actually say to them, I'd like to do this kind of story, and then they would commission a story along the lines of the thing you wanted to do. And as you say, you got to develop your character more, you got to play, you know, funnier scripts and have enjoy yourself. Then when Doctor Who came back, and I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, they then kind of took control, not in the sense of taking over the Big Finish as a company, but all the scripts have to go through the Doctor Who office now and be okayed by them. And it's become far more an official part of the Doctor Who canon. And that's been good, I think, as well. And they have some fantastic writers. The great advantage of Big Finish, at least prior to the BBC Doctor Who becoming involved again, was that you didn't have the problems. What you had is the writers writing for the actors without the people in between sort of going, I'll change this, that's not that, that's too much of a joke. I mean, that was a very frustrating thing for me. I was always quite keen on making the Doctor have a lighter side, my Doctor, but in the post-Tom Baker landscape, John Nathan Turner didn't like what he called the undergraduate humour of Tom Baker, which I think there was a point where it got a bit out of control during the... I love Douglas Adams, but, you know, when the two of them came together, it was more about trivialising the actual drama, I felt. Although it was very witty and brilliant. I wanted to keep humour in it, but there was a humour ban when I took over, and we would try and get little bits in, and John Nathan Turner, if he spotted them, would say, no, don't want that, no, we've got a serious programme here. So it was a bit frustrating. So I like the freedom that Big Finish has brought to my Doctor, and I think the series.
Yeah, I mean, Big Finish is marvellous. I mean, it really expands into areas that they could never do, you know, physically even on television. And the quality of radio is such that you can take people into you know, inside people's heads, which you wouldn't really be able to do on television. You can work out what's happening between the characters, and you know, for me personally, you know, I've done quite a few which are not Davros related, but they are related to Doctor Who, you know. And as you mentioned, those of you who don't know Big Finish, do get on them and have a look, you know. But I've done Davros about 10 times now. I find it interesting that, you know, I talk to Nick Briggs and I say, we're doing a Davros story this week. No, I don't think so. We just, I say, oh, okay, Davros is coming back in the main series. Because the minute Davros is coming back in the TV series, no Davros audios are made. But yeah, no, Quadriga Stoin was great fun for me because, you know, For those of you who don't know these, Quadrivigus Stoin was apparently a Time Lord who was on board the first TARDIS, decommissioning it, basically tearing it apart from the inside, when the Doctor stole it. And so he got fairly badly injured and a real chip on his shoulder, and was constantly trying to get the Doctor back to Gallifrey to stand trial by stealing his TARDIS. So there was a trilogy which started with, and we didn't have the Doctors, we had the companions, because they were called the Companion Chronicles. So, I was opposite Fraser Hines as Jamie, I was opposite Carol Ann Ford as Susan, and Lala Ward as Romana. And they were fascinating things because you can go all sorts of places with them, and it's lovely to be able to explore that. And it feeds into the main program as well. I mean, we did a mini-series called I, Davros, which traces Davros from a 15-year-old boy up to the creation of the first Dalek. So you see that transition, that journey from man to monster, and it's interesting that now they fed the young Davros into the new series, and explored that whole essence, which we did much more on radio than they could ever do on television, is the intellectual chess game that the Doctor and the Davros play with each other. Because they're on the same intellectual level, they're both alone, and they're both trying to flip the other one over, So that, for me, is the interesting part of those things, not the bangs and the whistles and the Daleks and the extermination. It's that psychological game. And Big Finish are great at being able to produce that on audio. Next.
I'm going to go over here next.
Hi, I'm a proud second-generation redneck nerd, and I'm proud to say that I'm raising my children to be proud to be a nerd too. And it's basically because my father, some of my best childhood memories was when my father would come home on Thursday night with Stouffer's frozen fresh pizza, which was a no-no in our house, and we would watch Doctor Who. And I grew up just enjoying everything about the universe. The Daleks to this day scare me. To this day, they terrify me, just because the inhumanity, as you said. Yeah. But I was wondering, what is the one enemy of the Doctor, besides the Daleks, that would actually scare you? Both of you, actually.
When I became an actor, I suffered from this thing that actors sometimes suffer from, which is what we call corpsing. Do you know what that is? It's where you just, for no reason at all, usually in the middle of a very serious scene, get the giggles. It's, usually when you're working with another actor and they know that you're about to laugh, and you know that they know, little twinkle, and you just, for the life of you, cannot stop laughing. And it's usually in the middle. I mean, I remember in my own career, there was one, when I was doing All Creatures Great and Small, there was one scene where I had to come in from the hallway. This was a series about veterinary surgeons that I'd made. And I had to tell the rest of the cast that, in the story, that the milkman's horse had died. He said, that was Tom on the phone, his horse just died. I never managed to do that without laughing. And it sounds terrible, doesn't it? Because the whole thing was it had ended the career of this milkman because his horse was dead. It should have been tragic. The only way I could find of stopping myself laughing was to remember a Patrick Troughton Cyberman story, where he discovered the Cybermen on the moon, I think. And it had terrified me so much, it would actually stop me laughing. That was the only thing that would stop me. It happened when we blew Madrick up as well. We were doing that scene after when we realised he'd been blown up. Janet and I, there was no, it wasn't because we were glad Matthew had gone, it really wasn't. It was because it was a really serious moment. And Janet looked at me, and I just couldn't look at her. We started giggling. And the only way we got through that scene, from my point of view, was by remembering that one scene from Doctor Who where being terrified by the Cybermen on the moon. So that would be it. The Cybermen on the moon is the one moment that terrified me. I suspect they're still up there.
And what about you, Mr. Terry?
Cybermen, but basically, when the new series started, I started to watch it, and I was loving some of them. But I have to say, I watched The Empty Child. I watched the first half of The Empty Child. I couldn't watch the second half for 2 months because I was convinced it was going to get worse, and it just scared the bejeebers out of me. Are you my mummy? I'm going, no! I'm going to get under the table. No, I'm not. It's that really gave me the freakies. It really did. Yeah.
quick. I just have to say happy birthday to my 10-year-old. So, Katie Jack. Happy birthday, baby girl.
Where is he? Where is
Sorry.
he?
Sorry for being indulgent, but thank you.
Stand up, stand up. Where are you?
Come on, stand
up,
up.
stand
Don't
up,
be
stand
shy.
up. Come on.
Everyone in
Where
the
is he?
auditorium is looking at you.
Yeah.
Yay!
And now we're all going to sing Happy Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Woo!
And we'll go back over here.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Davidson. The famous, or infamous, depending on your point of view, celery lapel for your Fifth Doctor's costume.
Yeah.
Did the producers pick it on purpose because they knew of your total dislike of celery?
I don't think it was quite that vindictive. No, I don't think they knew that. Indeed, I should have said it when he said, we're going to make you wear a stick of celery. I should have said I hate it, but I didn't, because I thought, well, it's safely on my lapel. Why do I have to worry? And then, of course, I realized when we did Castrovalva that it had to get on there somehow. And the idea was that in Castrovalva, I think there was a table of food and a stick of celery, and I sort of picked a stick up and went. I think I took a bite of it, didn't I? I took a bite of it, that's right, I took a bite of it. Of course, that's the moment where I realized I should have told him. What you don't see on camera at the end of that shot is me going, no, he just thought it would be something interesting to wear on my lapel. And it was, whether it was a good idea, I don't know. I just said I don't mind as long as you explain it before I leave. He waited till the last story to explain it. And,
Thanks, sir.
All right, we're going to go over here.
What was your favorite battle that you were in? It doesn't have to be against each other.
battle.
Doesn't have to be against.
Who was your favorite villain to fight?
Well, actually, no, I did. This is the case I was telling you before, but the favourite battle was, I think, the battle in Resurrection of the Daleks. Certainly in the warehouse where we were filming in this warehouse down, which now prestigious apartments, but in those old days it was warehouses. And there was one magical moment, my favourite moment, I think, in the entire series of mine, where I pushed a Dalek out of the window. There is no feeling better in the world than pushing a Dalek out of a window. That was what my children. I tried to brainwash my children shortly before the series returned in 2005 by showing them various stories of mine. And the one moment that stuck with them as well was Daddy pushes a Dalek out of the window. And it was a good battle, actually. It was a big sort of fight. I think we had a higher body count than Terminator in Resurrection of the Daleks.
Yeah. Or Rambo or something. Yeah,
Was it Rambo?
somebody
Probably
counted the bodies. Yeah. I mean, in that, Davros doesn't do much battling. He leaves it to the Daleks, But in remembrance, the thing that, again, one of these. Thankfully, I can corpse behind the mask, was when the Magellan virus hit the Daleks and all this squirty foam came out.
Oh yeah, that was great. I love that moment. Yeah, all the squirty foam.
Squirty foam everywhere, and Davros rushing off to his escape pod, which he always seems to have somewhere. Yeah.
All right, we're going to go over here.
So thank you both for coming to Pensacola, and thank you, Peter, for all your great non-Doctor Who work. Like many here, I grew up on PBS, and I also grew up on the Peter Haining reference books and all that great stuff in the 1980s, which looked like a very rosy time for Doctor Who. But in retrospect, you weren't happy with a lot of the scripts. The budgets were, as I think one script editor said, they gave the same budget every year, even though inflation was happening. Could you talk, since you've both been involved in Doctor Who over decades now, could you talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of your times on the main show in the context of the history of the show, and what worked and what didn't?
Yeah, it's very difficult when you talk about it. It sounds like I was very happy doing Doctor Who. You get these discussions in any series. You don't like this script, you don't like that script, and there were scripts that I didn't like. I didn't think that enough attention was paid to getting writers who loved the genre of science fiction to write for the show. They were too often, you know, a writer who would write a police series one week, a hospital series the next week, and then knock off a Doctor Who story. So I felt that was a weakness. I suppose, oddly, one of the strengths and weaknesses of the programme, it was John Nathan Turner. I think he did amazing things for the series. He lifted the profile of it. He was amazing at getting publicity. But I don't think he really liked science fiction that much, oddly. I don't think he was particularly keen. He loved the programme because it was his programme, so I don't mean to say he was disregarding that. But I think his priorities were just sort of elsewhere. He wanted to make the programme successful, but he didn't kind of engage in what I think might have made the series a bit better. So I found it a bit frustrating. But I don't want to give the wrong impression that it was an unhappy time, because it wasn't. You know, I loved making the series. I'd grown up watching it. You know, suddenly I was the Doctor. So in any series I could look back on that I loved, there's always, you know, been sort of doubts about this, doubts about that. There was a huge issue with the budget. You know, when I was making Doctor Who, when Terry was making it, involved in it, I don't think it was less popular than it is now, in Britain I'm talking about, but it was not a prestigious programme. It wasn't the sort of top of the line, you know. When it came back in 2005, it came back as the BBC's #1 programme. In every series it would get a Radio Times cover. There would be enormous publicity for that. It was a very, very high profile and successful programme, but not necessarily more popular, oddly. So the budgets were an issue. You know, we sold to 39 countries. We made an enormous amount of money for the BBC, and as you say, every year the budget was cut, because the BBC worked to a principle: if you were successful with a certain budget, next year you can be just as successful with slightly less. Rather than actually you need slightly more to make it more successful and better, they worked in the opposite direction. And what happened a lot of throughout the BBC, and again, I just as a side tangential thing here, can I say I think the BBC is a wonderful organisation, and it makes the most amazing value for money on every level: television, radio, online, in every respect. It's an amazing institution, and the idea that our present government is attacking it and trying to privatise it and trying to turn it into something that it isn't is disgraceful. Yeah. And I think it's a purely politically motivated attack on the BBC. And so anything I say, you have to understand, I love the BBC. I think it's done an amazing work and continues to do so. I said something in a little speech last year. You know, the BBC costs a week the equivalent of a cup of coffee from Starbucks. That's what it costs the British public in terms of a licence fee. An extraordinary value for money, really is. Anyway, but there's no doubt that there's a certain idea, and I think it's probably common in any television company, that you make the popular programmes to fund the programmes that maybe won't be quite so popular, but you want to make. There's nothing wrong with that idea. I kind of approve of it. But I think Doctor Who suffered from that thing. It was funding the less popular but more prestigious productions at the time.
I just, as a parting shot, we'd like to see the Five-ish Doctors remix more available here in the U.S.
Yeah, I didn't know that it wasn't available. I really didn't know that. So I'll look into that. Whether or not I have any say in it at all, I probably doubt. But I certainly will find out why that isn't the case.
I'd also like to defend the BBC in respect, because people are saying, oh, it's now, we can't download it, we can't stream it, because basically, because of the government's attitude, they've been basically told that you've got to become more self-sufficient, and so therefore you can't do these things. So you've got to it'll eventually up as a you know, pay system, whether it's through Netflix or BBC putting together their own streaming service. That's just the nature of, I'm afraid, the government we live under. But the BBC is brilliant, and as Peter says, the best value for money and the best broadcasting, in my opinion, around the world.
Okay, we only have time for one more question, so I'm going to go over here and get that question.
Hi, how did Davros get into Ceciled?
How did they get into the
The makeup and the suit.
Oh, the makeup and things, with difficulty. This kind of comes back to the BBC budgets again. I had a head mould made of my head, and then they built the mask and they made it, but it was made out of foam latex rubber, so it was very heavy and didn't move very much. And but it covered my entire head apart from my mouth, and then had to make up my mouth. And I don't know if anybody's seen a picture of me apparently having a cup of coffee with my mask on. That, in fact, was the end of the makeup process, where I was swilling my mouth out with black food dye. Most unpleasant thing, which the taste lingers for days. And then that took about an hour and a half to do all that and make up my eyes behind it. Then there was another 40 minutes getting into the chariot. And again, with the cuts, people say, it must have been great in that chariot. I said, yeah. This is the BBC we're talking about. It was made out of 4x2 timber, very heavy. Then they add two 12-volt car batteries in the back to run all the electrics. And it's built on a supermarket trolley base. So they cut a hole in the floor, and I drag it around with my toes. So I do still have the strongest toes in Europe.
And on that note, thank you for coming, and thank you to Peter and Terry for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.